Okay, I think maybe we'll get started now. Hello, everybody. Welcome back for another webinar for these times we're in. And this is scheduled to be the second webinar working with Monet, the work of Monet through the lens and words of Andrew Forge, looking through his book on his monograph on Claude Monet. Thank you all for joining me, and thank you very much for the donations. It means a great deal. And also just gathering together in the middle of all of this means a lot. It's good to have a sense of community as we are all figuring out how to get through these days. Before I go back into Andrew Forge's take on Monet, I just try to keep myself together here. I just found out that William Bailey passed away. He was a teacher of mine at the same time that Andrew Forge was. Passed away a couple days ago. I just found out, just got an email from his gallery. And we were friendly. We kept in touch over the years. I was at an opening for him last year ago, March, in New York. And you know, how do I say it? There's something about all these people. William Bailey, Andrew Forge, Claude Monet. You know, the other folks that were there that I met, John Hollander, Natalie Charco, Ruth Miller. Ruth and Natalie are still with us, thank goodness. The generation before that, well, they gave their lives to form, to the power and adventure and beauty of form, and what form can mean for us as human beings. What is this engagement with form? You know, we're painters, and so what is, you know, we have a particular form that we work with, painting. But there is something possible, as curious as it is. There's something really possible about making form, experiencing form that hits us, resonates, reminds us, awakens us to something that is beyond form. It's invisible. It's real. And William Bailey really, he really did that. His paintings really did that. If you ever get a chance to you know, on the web, you kind of see these things and okay, but yeah, get a chance. Go to the Betty Cunningham Gallery in New York and see some of his work. Or the Yale University Gallery, or, well, I don't know where else they are. I'm sure they're all over the place. You mute, whoever is, please mute your, we're hearing some kitchen noises, I think.
That's probably you.
Thank you. Anyway, I just wanted to speak of William Bailey. Maybe we'll look at a few pieces of his work, and then I'll do a screen share. We'll look at some of his work, and then we'll go on to Claude Monet and Andrew Forge's take on Monet. So let me do a screen share here of here. This was taken at last March at the Betty Cunningham Gallery in the Lower East Side in New York, the opening. This is before everyone had come in. This is just the beginning here. We'll see a few of his paintings. And here's a small still life, and these are all preliminary sketches he did of just composition, working it through, figuring it out. That's a fairly large painting. Curious thing. Crazy, kind of warped deal. Let's see if I can find, there's a lovely quote in the email that Betty Cunningham sent out. William Bailey says, if I can see this. My paintings are like imagined towns, not real ones. They are places for me, painting places. If there is an idealism in my painting, it has more to do with the painting ideal than an ideal subject. The gallery goes on. Bill was the one who taught us to find mystery in clarity. And in his paintings, he delivered to us a rarefied silence. We will miss his presence deeply, but are grateful for the gift that he leaves for all of us. Okay. So let's see. I'll start in here. I wanted to go back to where we were when we started off last time. I left out some parts when I was reading to try to focus. We focused more last week on notation, the way Andrew Forge is understanding Monet's project, the way he's coming to terms with his mark. How do I find a shorthand? How do I notate what I'm seeing? What I left out some things as I was reading through, and I'd like to come back and read them, and they have to do with color. The palette is cool rather than warm, reflecting the artist's interest in constructing the quality of outdoor light rather than studio light. Observation focuses on the circumstances of the moment, on l'effet. I suppose that means the effect, which comes to include not only the time of day and the particular quality of light, but the quality of the medium through which surfaces are seen, l'envelope. To put it another way, aerial perspective is removed from the realm of studio convention and studied as an actual phenomenon, as an event in color relationships. Whoop. And I want to go back to this one, that. Okay. To put it another way, aerial perspective is removed from the realm of studio convention and studied as an actual phenomenon, as an event in color relationships. This is the marvel that produces the Impressionist palette, the insight that the whole visible world can be reconstructed on the level of color. Color, pure, variegated, shot, can take on the quality of light, not by the traditional schema of light and dark tonalities, but by its simultaneous interaction on the picture surface. The question of the color of shadows preoccupies the Impressionist painters. It is the very area that academic art conventionalizes through modeling and the generalizing power of the dark ground, conceived as darkness or the absence of color. The Impressionist pigeon grays, gunmetal greens, violets, lavenders, lilacs, cornflower blues do not depend on their darkness to work as shadows, but on their crisp interaction with the warm elements that make up the other half of the equation. Transitions of light into shadow become transitions of positive color, never a degradation of the light. It is often said that the earth colors in black are excluded from the Impressionist palette, but this is not invariably so. What matters is that these pigments, no longer needed for their traditional function to model, are now used as colors in their own right. By the same token, the traditional studio practices of working on a dark ground, usually a reddish brown or laying in the broad features of the painting in earth tones. Methods that Monet had continued to follow in his large figure compositions were gradually dropped in favor of working directly on a white ground. The elaborate scumbles and glazes that academic painters had used to develop strongly modeled forms out of toned grounds were no longer relevant. Impressionist paint during the 70s was applied directly and opaquely with frank and open brushwork, although it cannot be overemphasized that Monet's color is in no way disorderly or random. He continued throughout his life to structure his palette with great care, moving from few colors to many as the work progressed. Okay, now I'm going to skip the part where he's writing about this painting, the river, and Camille, his wife, sitting there, and we'll skip forward. And now is the section where he talks about the way of working. Any way of working implies a philosophy, a position. Technique is the first embodiment of content. The more evolved the technique, the more clearly this may be seen. Meaning accrues with manipulation. The painter sees this and responds. His recognition is added to the earlier content and informs further manipulation. We start to work, we see what's happening, we respond. This way of working means something to me, that mark, oh, I try this, I try that, and I build on this technique that I'm working on. A dialogue develops between the maker and the made that is unique to the conditions of making. It has its past and its future, its own limitations, and hence its own unique possibility of freedom. Did Monet foresee the drumming of those black-green dabs when he started to paint the trees over Camille's head? Or at least foresee them in all the richness of their future? It seems that when one of the factors included in a technique is an element of apprenticeship to appearances, then those appearances are included in the formative dialogue. So it's not only I'm working with the material, I've got a technique that I am in relationship to, but that relationship is in relationship to the appearances, what I'm seeing, and how does it correspond, and so that what I'm seeing starts to impact this technique, this way of using the material. The idea of a picture shapes the motif. What I think a picture should be, what I think is appropriate for a painting, will affect what I go and look for when I go to paint. It's like, oh no, I can't paint that. It doesn't look, oh, that looks like a painting. I could see that. I'm going to paint that. That works for me as a painting. I can see that. That's my motif. The motif, in turn, shapes the picture. So as I'm working with it, it starts to, oh, I need to do this and I need to do that in relation to the scene that I picked. Painting willy-nilly pictorializes the world. We turn the world into pictures through painting. It is the painter's fantasy to terrestrialize the painting. That is, as I'm painting, I am imagining that I am making the world. There's this back and forth dialectic relationship between the world, the motif, and the painting. Back and forth. For the painter, the motif weightily epitomizes the picture. This can be the picture, and offers conjunctions that, although they do not lie outside his ken as a painter, or he would not be able to see them, nevertheless transforms his sense of what a picture might be. What happens as I begin to work with the motif is it starts to affect how I understand what a painting can do, how it might function. What are the possibilities? It's not only that I go out and pick this motif to fit my preconception of a picture. As I begin to work, the motif in all of its possibilities starts to come back and impact me on what a painting can be. Now things get pretty cool here. I'm going to go to the next picture. Okay. Consider two aspects of nature that Monet was to make essential themes: water and atmosphere. He once said that the sea meant so much to him that he would like to be buried at sea in a buoy. Time after time, he finds in the sea a reflection of his inner states. In his early work, we can hardly mistake the romantic identification with the little storm-tossed fishing boats or the pounding waves on the jetty at Le Havre. Favorite subjects when his own struggles for independence from his family were at their height. Later, frozen floods on the Seine at the time of Camille's death, or tempests off the coast of Belle-Île play who knows what part in assuaging his inner turmoil. But there is more to water than this. Water gives back an apparently unending series of revelations, not only through its own nature as motif, but by a kind of alchemy of broader pictorial possibilities. The extent of the sea, its infinite variety in oneness, water's power to take up the quality of the sky, the day, the weather, and yet remain itself. Its power to reflect and thus offer up symmetry. Its power to reflect even as it is itself in movement and thus to interpenetrate, to annex, to fragment, to disperse appearances while yet holding them within a larger, more inclusive order. God, he writes well. He just writes so beautifully. The rippling water of the Seine at Le Grenouillère is of the Dutch canal, or of the Dutch canals 2 years later, had to be painted directly. This meant to accept water's fragmentation, its highlights and reflections, its restlessness, and to read its action in terms of color. It's just, that is stunning. How the heck? Let's see if we can go to the next one here. there is opened up a sense of interpenetration that affects everything. On the right of Le Bain de la Grenouillère, the water. So we're talking about this area here. The water is here. On the right of Le Bain de la Grenouillère, the water, a panoply of interlocking plates of color, involves sky, pontoon, bathers, trees, boats. The water is not drawn as it would have been by either a Canaletto or a Turner. It is recreated in a vivid weave of brushstrokes, none of which lock onto its pictured surface, but which shimmer and rock on the eye. A powerful blue dominates in the foreground. Moving back to a pale cerulean beyond the pontoon, shot with lemony white highlights, gold green, olive, rose, blackish blue, umber. This passage gives the key to every other aspect of the picture. On the left, light breaks through the trees. Their luminous trunks stand out like golden stripes, scaled to the same brushstroke as the blue and lilac shadowed oars of the boats. Everything on the left breaks up into touches, dim, muted stripes, flicks, blobs, as it does on the right in the brilliant action of sunlight on water. Two women in long dresses walk back into the land. Flowers send out sparks of color. Sunlight strikes faces, tiny points of luminous pink among the leaves and brownish gray trunks. Swimmers are dissolved in the light, broken into figurative luminous specks, half lost in the glitter. Everything is everywhere. Water offers more than its own features. It is, in a sense, the model for how Monet can see other things. The vision that he was developing in the atmosphere itself is analogous to his understanding of water and was perhaps shaped by it. To be able to imagine the atmosphere as a continuous, unbroken envelope, to be able to imagine every visible thing located within that envelope, washed and colored by it, to understand that the envelope is the condition of being able to see anything at all, is akin to being able to imagine air as we imagine water. Fog, falling snow, smoke, the haze of a hot day. All are extreme conditions that bring this fantasy nearer. But this transmutation from water to air, from substance to reflection, from the local item to the condition of seeing it, goes further still. The envelope, in its oneness and variety, is a model for the canvas itself. That's pretty great. You know, so the canvas, what a canvas is. And the whole sense that Monet was developing, how Andrew Forge is understanding Monet's understanding, that the envelope of what is seen, the visible, the world seen, is a model for the canvas. In the group of studies made in 1873 from the hotel window overlooking the harbor at Le Havre, Monet lays in each canvas as a unified field of gray, warm, smoky gray in one, bluish night gray or pearly dawn gray. Is it that the foggy dawn and the water of the harbor are described by this means on the canvas, or that the grayed canvas is seen as an oblong of luminous fog? Sky and water in Impression Soleil Levant are hardly distinguishable. Boundaries that are fundamental out there are the finest of nuances here. The paint becomes the place and an effect by permission of the place and the effect. Its glooming, opalescent oneness, its foggy blankness, its featureless, expectant emptiness that resembles for the painter an empty, uninflected canvas. The accents of blue-gray and orange that finally precipitate the sunrise and the boats and masts in this empty field are like last-minute revelations that had to wait, not only for the particular glimmer of orange to burn its way through the fog and find its reflective path onto the water and Monet's eye, but for the canvas itself, pregnant with the foggy space outside, to be ready to receive it. There's a developing correspondence between how the painting is becoming itself, how the canvas becomes the painting, and the painting discovers its form. This is finding a correspondence with Monet's perceptual experience. Those things are finding they're locating each other. Water and its companion atmosphere become active as principles of selection. So now that he's on to water and atmosphere, it's like, what else can, let me go there. Let's see what that does. They break down the boundaries between things, diffuse light, spread reflections, redistribute identities, flatten, bond everything together within the oneness of a condition of light. Their action in the world epitomizes Monet's vision and his practice on the canvas, as his practice epitomizes what he sees in the world. In Le Pont Routier Argenteuil, the river offers back to the sky its light, irradiating the undersurfaces of the bridge, bringing the reflection of the tower at the end of the bridge down the canvas so that the reflection makes a column-like interval between the columns of the bridge and the masts to the left. Spreading the colors of boats and sails like little vivid increments of light throughout its surface. The degree to which any of these forms are realized in themselves is controlled by the envelope, the condition of light as it is embodied in water and sky. A list of Monet's motifs during the 70s would be much more than a list of things or conditions painted. It would be the beginning of an outline of his ideas of what a painting could be. In the spring, a whole hillside is painted through a swelling curtain of apple blossoms. The myriad scarlet points of a field of poppies are outside any normal gamut of values. They hang in a haze that is neither the field nor the picture's surface, but somewhere in an atmosphere between the two. Crowded flower beds, city streets, the masts of boats, wobbling in reflection, smoke, steam, fog, all offer models of pictorial structures. The vocabulary Monet had developed, the high-key palette of pure color, the range of mark, the mastery of ellipsis, all this allows him to paint anything and to look in any direction. Whatever motif he turns to will hold clues for new pictorial events. This will happen in a real existential situation in which the relationship in time and place lost my place. Here we are. The relationship in time and place between the idea and the making of the picture is unbroken. I'm going to reread that. This will happen in a real existential situation in which the relationship in time and place between the idea and the making of the picture is unbroken. It all happens together. It's one thing that's occurring as he's painting. The brush moving at will in any direction, freed from traditional centered drawing, accumulating on the canvas color that is unattached to the skin of the things depicted, seems to weave an equivalence between the whole field of vision and the picture surface. Seems to weave an equivalence between the whole field of vision and the picture surface. Later, it is open to him to lock a mark onto a particular identity or to twirl it back and forth between one thing and another, to paint directly toward the layer of light and atmosphere between himself and the surface of things. But this freedom could never have been found if it had not been for the passage through the early 70s, when the dialogue between motif and canvas was at its most excited. That was a lot. You don't want to say anything? I mean, we can go further. There's more, of course. And but I thought, maybe we should pause here. If anyone wants to catch their breath or have a thought or respond or question or anything.
What was the name of that last painting, Jordan?
Hey,
The reflections on the bridge.
Yeah, that one. Hang on. That is, oh, I just read it. I should go back. Where am I? That is Les Ponts Routiers Argenteux. LE space PONT space ROUTIER, comma ARGENTEUIL. And I looked up how you pronounce that. I don't know if I did a good job. Speak French. Yeah. Any other questions or comments or anything before we move into the next piece here?
I was going to say that it's so humbling to hear put into words things that you've only sensed. I'm really struck by that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Andrew Forge, he's crystallizing it in words. It's like, yes, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And then through that crystallization, that whole dynamic becomes more available for me to start to work with more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, yes.
But I'm not just feeling it in my mind either. I'm feeling it throughout.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we know this because it's like our hands are going to recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
Our whole system that's engaged in this.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens, because he's so articulate, my mind, in a sense, is able to participate with my eye and hands and material more fully.
Okay.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jordan, how would this compare to the process used by academics, painters at the time of Monet? I mean, is it very, very totally different? Is it sort of built on it, or?
No, the academic painters, they were coming out of French Academy. Things were done according to a very particular system, and you were modeling. It was studio work that was more centered on the figure and idealized proportion and history painting and the Renaissance tradition. Very different.
So it was completely radical at the time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, that's why they were rejected, right? They had to have their own exhibitions, and this whole way of handling the paint. It was just seen as unfinished, and that he was an upstart. Anyone else? Thoughts, questions?
So Jordan, was Monet in his time recognized as the genius that he was?
Oh yes, things changed quickly during his time. And he lived into huge cultural and financial success. He was certainly a treasure. But he struggled through decades until through his 30s and 40s. I mean, it took time for the culture and the market around him to catch up to where he was. He was ahead of all that. Sure. Yeah. But he didn't, I mean, he certainly experienced real recognition and success in his life.
Okay.
Anyone else? Thoughts? So maybe we'll go on to another section. So we're going to move now ahead to the 80s. And he has in chapter 3, Andrew Forge, it's called Campaigns, and he goes through and he goes and describes all kinds of campaigns where is the term that Monet used to go out and spend time out in the landscape in certain places and paint. So I'm going to screen share a painting here. Let's see. Yes. that. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Perhaps emotional anxiety acted as a spur of sorts. 1882 was a year of almost superhuman productivity. Monet's campaign started in February at Dieppe. Soon he moved a short way down the coast to the little village of Pourville, where he painted at the foot of the cliffs and from their tops, where he found two important subjects. One, a little church perched on top of the cliff's edge overlooking the sea. The other, a Napoleonic Coast Guard hut built as a lookout at the time of the British blockade. These huts in Monet's time, used mostly by fishermen, were dotted along the Chanel coast. He had painted a study of one of them near Le Havre in 1867, was to paint them again in the 90s. Monet went back to Pourville later that summer with his family. It was not a success. The weather turned against him, as he was so often to do. He made scores of starts he was unable to finish. His mood alternated between euphoria and despair. Alice was bored. Alice was his companion after his wife Camille died. Monet painted indoors as the rains fell, bouquets of roses, peonies, chrysanthemums, a brace of pheasant. He continued to work on his Pourville canvases after returning to Poissy. You know, it's important to know, I mean, and we saw a lot of this at the museum, at the Denver Art Museum, the show. Lots of starts, lots of working through stuff, you know, and so many of those paintings that we saw, they weren't finished paintings. He was working through stuff. He's just, and clearly, you know, this whole line here, you know, his mood alternated between euphoria and despair, right? You know, we know that in our work. It's like, oh, it's working. Oh, no, it's not. Oh, yes, it is. Oh, no, it's not. The following winter, his re-exploration of the Normandy coast took him to Etretat, where he had spent some weeks in 1868 through 1869. Etretat was the site of the most famous cliff formation on the French coast, a beauty spot whose spectacular chalk arches and flying buttresses had been painted by Delacroix and Courbet, as well as numberless topographers. Courbet, 6 years dead, must have been vividly present in Monet's mind at this time. So these are two black and white reproductions of paintings by Courbet of this spot. Of all the painters of the preceding generation, he, Courbet, was in every way the most important to Monet, an exemplar who inspired him and challenged him at a far deeper level than the retiring Boudin. Boudin was his teacher. They had been at their closest on the Normandy coast. In an uncharacteristic claim, Monet wrote to Alice that he was planning a large painting of the cliffs after Courbet, adding that the project was terribly audacious. The large painting never materialized. The weather turned violent. He had to work from the shelter of the hotel, from which, just like any tourist, he could see the well-known view of the Porte de Val and its needle sticking up into the sea. But Courbet's aggressive presence is surely there in his path, to be acknowledged and finally to be buffeted aside in studies that start with the picturesque view of the array of cliffs and go on to close-up pieces of the cliff. Extraordinary declarations of mass, tremendous displacements of gravity, blanched presences like the bones of ruins of the cathedrals of giants. During the winter of 1883-1884, the lease on the house at Poissy drew to a close. It had been a place Monet had hated, and he had done little work there. He longed for a permanent base where he could at least paint and face misfortune with a good heart, as he put it to Duran-Ruel, who was his dealer. He began to explore the reaches of the Seine around Vernon, and on one of these journeys discovered Giverny, an obscure little village on one of the branches into which the river Epte divides before it joins the Seine. Here he found a farmhouse to rent that exactly suited his needs. It stood at the foot of a hill between the main road of the village and the track of a little railway that joined Vernon and Gisors. A large garden ran down to the railway, and beyond were a willowy-lined stream called the Rue, water meadows, tall plantations of poplars, and a few kilometers on, the Seine itself. As an environment, it had everything Monet needed. With Duran-Ruel's help, the debts at Poissy were settled, and the move to Giverny was made in April 1883. No sooner had the family arrived and started unpacking than the news came of Manet's death. Asked by Manet's family to act as a pallbearer, Monet again had to appeal to Duran-Ruel for the fare to Paris and help with the purchase of a black suit. The other bearers were Antonin Proust, Henri Fontaine-Latour, Alfred Stevens, Zola Duret, and Philippe Berti. Cézanne and Pissarro attended. Back at Giverny, Monet began at once to plant the garden. The base he had longed for was becoming a reality. He was to live at Giverny for the rest of his life. He bought the property in 1890 and gradually extended and elaborated it until it became a self-sufficient domain. But as a painter, his beginnings there were tentative. So that's what I brought to share today. I forgot who asked me last week about the development of Monet. How do we understand how Monet got to what he ended up doing with the water lilies and his whole project in Giverny and his whole understanding of painting there? And it seems to me that there's something that, as Andrew Forge is writing, he's looking back through and bringing us up towards Monet's achievements in Giverny. And I'm not sure I'll be able to do that in one more session, maybe two, a little bit. We'll see. I'll do one more and then I'll see what makes sense. Maybe we'll take a break or we'll do one more after that. Yeah, any thoughts before we sum up here? Okay.
Jordan, it's Gage.
Hi, Gage.
Just learning how to work this thing. I just thought it was beautiful to hear such a wonderfully verbally articulate description of so many things that are happening in Monet's paintings. I think he's so often, it's easy to see him as sort of saccharine these days and not really real.
That's right.
Profound shift.
Calendar painter. Another picture for a calendar.
Right. Yeah. So that was wonderful. It was really great to hear him articulate all that, and it was wonderful to join you all and to get to see the smile on your face when you read a sentence that particularly resonated. I love that.
Thanks, Gage. It's good to hear your voice.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks, Jordan. Really appreciate it.
Tina, thank you. I see you have a comment here. Yes, he brings Monet to life. He certainly does. Forge does that. Yeah, you're very welcome. Any other thoughts, suggestions, comments? Well, thank you all again for joining me. It's really a pleasure sharing all of this with you. And for those of you that have made a donation, thank you very much. If you would like to make a donation next week, that's fine as well. There's a new change to the website. There's a donation page, so feel free. Thank you. I have online courses available. If you're interested, please check those out. And there's a lot of great online stuff now. Wonderful courses. If you are interested, send me an email. I've got some wonderful colleagues who are doing some great stuff out there. Catherine Kehoe and Zoe Frank. And send you links if you don't have them. What else? Keep it together. Draw and paint. Do your thing. We're blessed here in Colorado to have some beautiful sunny days. Get outside. And we'll be in touch. Okay. Take care, everybody. Be well. Bye-bye.